logic in me.
Hi guys, it's Caitlin from The Vision, and today I'm going to be doing a video in our Real Talk series, and this video is going to be answering the question, does God exist? Well, we all know that we can't really answer that question beyond the shadow of a doubt.
But why? Why is God something that cannot be proven beyond shadow of a doubt, if it can, in fact, be proven at all? Why isn't it so obvious that everyone knows it's there, or at least the overwhelming population would know that it was there, and not have confusions about who it is, or what it wants? Why wouldn't it be visible from the moment that we're born till the moment that we perish? Why wouldn't it interact with us all the time? These questions are met by excuses from theology, but those excuses require additional beliefs. You have to believe that God is willing to hide itself from humanity because reasons. And that's just not good enough.
Or a world would look a lot differently, but obviously here at The Vision we do believe God exists, and so today I'm going to be laying out 4 major arguments for the existence of God, and these arguments are for the existence of a theistic God, not necessarily the Christian God, but just a God who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and created the universe. So that's what I'm going to be looking at giving evidence for today. And so let's jump right in.
And it's very important that you understand that arguments are not evidence. This is something that many apologists seem to not be aware of, or if they're aware of it, they just ignore it. Because, well, at the end of the day, all they have is the arguments. There isn't any other sort of proof that they can put forward for God. There's no way to directly observe God. There's no way to test God. So the only thing left is arguments. But arguments are not evidence. The premises could potentially be some evidence, but if you had the evidence, you wouldn't necessarily need the argument. You just present the evidence. But the reason that all you have is the arguments is going to be at least shown with these 4 arguments, identifying at least one or more fallacious ideas within the arguments presented means that the conclusion doesn't follow, which means that the conclusion is something we must be skeptical of. It could still be true, but we don't have any reason to believe it, so we know that the argument needs to be fixed. What's weird is that even when you understand logic, and you understand that these are fallacies, you'll note that theists do not change the arguments. That, too, should give you pause.
So the first argument is the ontological argument, and this was coined by a guy named Anselm a long time ago, and was based on a principle that he said, if it is possible that God exists, then it follows logically that God does exist. Now that sounds a little crazy, but bear with me. So Anselm was talking about, like, if there's all of these possible worlds, so each of these worlds has how things could have been if it wasn't like it actually was. And our actual world is a possible world, it's just the true possible world. So unicorns could exist in a possible world because unicorns could have been created. But a square circle could not be in a possible world because that's logically impossible. So Anselm says that because it is logically possible that a maximally great, that's very key, all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect being could be in a world, that is a possible idea. If it exists in one possible world, so let me back up a little bit. So God, it is possible that God exists, so he exists in a possible world.
It might have been helpful to have the argument to just read from verbatim, but that's kind of a side issue. This argument already has logical fallacies, and those are really the ones I would want to address anyways. What does it mean to be a being? what does that mean in this context? Now, the only thing that we know of, for sure, without any argument needed, is that there are beings on this planet. Human beings, at least. Okay, well, are animals beings in that same sense? Are plants beings? Are insects beings? Are microbes beings? Are rocks beings? Or do we only think that things that are alive are beings? And then do we have a separation between the conscious being of an animal versus the unconscious being of a plant or a tree? And who decides that categorization? So if we haven't really pinned down what the word being is, we already have a potential equivocation. But I dare say it is an equivocation because it changes the moment that you say that it's possible that a maximum being could exist. Well, what do you mean by maximum? That's kind of a problem. But you're also changing the idea of being from something that we are familiar with and that we know exists to something that is alien and different than any other being that we've ever observed before. Because we're granting it ideas and imbuing it with powers that no other being has ever had or has ever been shown to have. So if that's not a different sort of being, I don't know what is. Therefore, the word being must be an equivocation within this argumentation. Whether that's deliberate or not is irrelevant. It's equivocation. He's changing the word being from common usage to mean God. Otherwise, the argument would just say it's possible for God to exist, so God exists, and there you go. And, well, in essence, that's what you summarize it to later on. The idea that a thing could exist doesn't mean that it does exist. A perfect human could exist, and it's possible that a perfect human could exist. Therefore, a perfect human does exist. But where? Where's this perfect human? The other final problem is that beyond just not being able to find something into existence in this way, all I have to do is add that a maximally great being would be one that reveals itself to all of humanity in such a way that we are not unsure about its existence and not confused at what its being is like. And that being has not presented itself. Thus, the maximally great being does not exist. See, what maximally great means is up to the individual that's proposing the argument in the first place, isn't it? Unless you want to say, well, that it's some sort of objective thing, but the argument doesn't bother to demonstrate it, and neither have you. Moving on to the next argument.
So the second argument for God's existence is kind of the beginning argument, or the contingency argument, or the cosmological argument. They're kind of similar, they may be slightly different, but I'm kind of grouping them into one here. And this argument answers the question, why is there something rather than nothing? So, we have something, so how did it get here? And it's generally accepted that space, matter, and time had a beginning. You could have asked Stephen Hawking when he was alive. You can look on NASA's website. They even say the universe had a beginning. So what made the universe begin? Everybody says Big Bang. Big Bang began the universe. And as Christians, we just think the Big Bang was created by God.
I don't know who's to blame for this bad understanding of science, if it's your school or the religion. But maybe it's pictures like this. See, we tend to think of things in this way, that there's a beginning, a middle, an end, and the point on the far left, well, that's the beginning of the universe, but that's not really correct. See, the fact of the matter is there was no time or space before the Big Bang. The universe is just energy. Then the universe expanded, and it's very hot when it does that, and then it began to cool, and that's when we get all our cool, groovy stuff going on. There is simply no room for anything to make the beginning begin because, well, there's nothing before the before. There's no time. There's no space. But of course, you and other apologists will say God is outside time and space, so God's allowed to exist before there was anything else. Even though the only thing that was before anything else was energy. And that's it. That's all that there was. So I guess God's energy in that case. But then God couldn't also be a mind, or have power, or anything else that's attributed to God. But the only reason you would attribute those things to God is that attributing things to nature is common for humans to do. And here's a profound mystery. What happened to make this happen in the first place? And rather than saying we don't know, which is honest, theists say it was God. Which is dishonest, in a sense, because it cannot be shown to be true. Now, they might believe it, so that doesn't make them dishonest, but the idea is simply not something that can be shown to be the case. The Kalam breaks down on several logical fronts, as well as scientific problems, and many of those depend upon the wording of the Kalam that you present. But because you're presenting kind of a broken Kalam here anyways off the cuff and not reading it verbatim, it's very hard to address the specific Kalam that you're referring to. I think that the science is more than enough to negate the Kalam as a whole. Even if you want to say, well, fine, before there was time and energy, before there was space, there was God, you still have made an assertion that you would have to prove separately. Just saying that there is, or that there must be, doesn't necessarily follow. Because you have to show that cause and effect is continuous. Otherwise, the whole idea that there has to be a first cause goes out the window. And when you rewind the universe far enough, you get to a point where physics, as we understand it, breaks down. At that point, we don't know if cause and effect is still even a thing at all. So how could we possibly say that it continues backwards from that point, without just asserting it to be true? This argument is scientifically and logically flawed. Moving on.
Everything else has a cause, but God doesn't need a cause because he has to exist.
If the general picture, however, of a Big Bang followed by an expanding universe is correct, what happened before that? Was the universe devoid of all matter, and then the matter suddenly, somehow created? How did that happen? In many cultures, the customary answer is that a god or gods created the universe out of nothing. But if we wish to pursue this question courageously, we must, of course, ask the next question. Where did God come from? If we decide that this is an unanswerable question, why not save a step and conclude that the origin of the universe is an unanswerable question? Or, if we say that God always existed, why not save a step and conclude that the universe always existed, that there's no need for a creation, it was always here? These are not easy questions. Cosmology brings us face to face with the deepest mysteries, with questions that were once treated only in religion and myth.
So the third argument is the design argument, and this basically says the universe has a design, so there must be a designer. So the universe is uniquely fine-tuned for life.
Can you see it? Can you see all the billions and billions of life forms teeming in all of space, all around, everywhere you look? No? Oh, what? You mean outer space is not somewhere that life can flourish? Okay, well, what about on stars? Yeah, there's tons of life on them. No? Oh, okay, meteorites, asteroids, they're there, right? There's lots of life on those things. No? Okay, well, what about planets? There should be life on every single planet, right? The universe is so tuned for life that life should be everywhere. But it's not. Life is here on this planet, and that's all we know about. That's it. We have one example of where life has come about. And maybe one day we'll find life or evidence of life somewhere else, but that day is not today. Our teeny tiny planet that cannot be seen when you pull back because it's too small, and then our sun is too small, it disappears amongst all the other stars, and there's millions of stars and millions of specks of dust that are, well, planets and meteorites and asteroids and rogue planets and rogue stars and black holes and all sorts of other things. Places where life, at least life that we know about, could not survive. In some cases, more than even a fraction of a millisecond. That you would simply stop being alive. You know, if you go into a black hole, you're dead. Very quickly, and you didn't even know that you were dead because it happened so fast. Or, well, because time dilates in a black hole, maybe you are aware of the molecules in your foot being crushed down into nothingness as you spaghettify, and it would be a horrible way to go if you were aware of it all the way up until the point when your body just stops functioning. Who knows? I don't want to go and volunteer for that mission. It's a one-way trip. Plus, you wouldn't be able to convey what's happening to anybody outside because nothing can escape, so that's kind of a problem. At any rate, to say that the universe is fine-tuned for life simply ignores the fact that the universe is not fine-tuned for life. Otherwise, we would find life everywhere we look. On the flip side, our planet, you might say, is tuned for life, but that then ignores the history of our planet. Our tiny speck within our tiny speck of our solar system, within the grand tiny speck of the Milky Way, is about 4.54 billion years old. And only for some of that time was life even possible to begin in the first place. So, no, the universe is not tuned for life. It seems that life is tuned for the conditions that it arrives in of the universe. Yeah, sure, we're lucky that the conditions permit life in the first place, but we're lucky that life came about also. But to make that into some sort of, well, it's got to be a design, what kind of clunky, broken design only has a sub fraction of it where life is possible, if you care about life in the first place? So you're telling me you made a computer with 20,000 gigs of RAM, and you're only using 1 pixel. Yeah, that's a good design there. Good job. Yeah, that really was brilliant. So what did all that other space do? Oh, it's just there, just for fun. You know, it's just, made it that big. No real reason. Just wanted it to be big and empty and uninhabitable to life as we know it. Maybe other life, but we don't know. We can't say anything about the life that we don't know. So this argument is broken scientifically.
So I'm talking about the gravitational force, I'm talking about the Earth's rotation, the Earth's tilt, the Earth's distance from the sun, I'm talking about Jupiter's gravity, the moon, water, all of these things that we rely on to live that are so perfectly put together in a way that we can live. And I'm also talking about you, because you're designed in a very intricate way.
No, I am not designed at all. That begs the question. We, you and I, are products of biological evolution, and I wouldn't be surprised if you've been told that that's not a real thing, or it's just a theory, or some other nonsense by creationists who want to keep you enslaved into a backwards idea of how to view the world. Learn some science, young girl. Please. Your mind is at stake. Do you want to move forward with humanity and also cause humanity to move forward, or do you want to hold us back? If you want to hold us back, stick with your religion. You'll do just fine holding us back. But if you want to move us forward, then go with science. And the problem there is you might have to leave some of your doctrines and dogmas behind. At the very least, you'll have to leave these bad arguments in the bin where they belong. These arguments are question-begging and assume a lot of things. The human body is far from perfect. It is far from being designed even moderately adequately. If you and I can come up with things that would improve upon human body, then God, if it exists, has no excuse to not have done those things. There are children born without a brain. They just have a brain stem. That's kind of messed up. There are people born without limbs or with too many limbs. Or there's this one girl that was born and she has another girl attached to her. And that other girl is also alive. So she has two heads on one body. That can't be good and comfortable at times. You know, they make it work. Who knows how long she'll survive. But yeah, that's not a good design. That our many body parts can fail us. That's not good either. And of course then religion just excuses away all of the problems with the human body and says, well, it was perfect at first, but then humans disobeyed God, and then God had to punish us, and the punishment is making us not be perfect anymore, and that's why we're so messed up. But then if that's true, we couldn't use this argument because we wouldn't be presenting a perfect structure, we'd be presenting a flawed structure and say, see how flawed this creation is? Obviously, there's a flawed creator, but that would screw up the argument. So the argument ignores the fact that we're flawed and says, look at how good it's designed. There must be a designer. Yeah, because you question-begged that it was designed in the first place. It's like, reality requires a realtor to sell it. Ha ha, therefore God. It's dumb and it doesn't work. And you can do better than this, and you must do better than this, or drag us all behind and be left behind as the rest of us advance. Now, yes, scientists do believe in God. And that's separate from agreeing with this nonsense that you're presenting here. These arguments are flawed at logical levels as well as scientific levels. Your body is not designed. It's a product of evolution. Period. End of story. That's scientific. That's science fact. You could still believe there's a God, but you'd have to get rid of the ideas that you attach to that God where it designed the body, because there's no evidence that there is a design of the human body in the first place. And if it is designed, then it's designed very poorly, and we humans could do a much better job, making the designer an imperfect designer at best, and a stupid designer at worst.
And so that kind of leaves us with two possibilities. Either there was a mind behind it, or it happened all by chance, and it takes a lot less faith to say that there was a mind behind that than that it all happened by chance.
Well, that convinces me you do not understand evolution at all. You've been taught something completely different than the scientific fact of the matter. It's not chance by itself because there's this thing called natural selection. And if you learn actual biology and leave behind the creationism that you're being saddled with, which is anti-evolution, anti-science, you'll learn that it's nothing to do with chance at all. Period. End of story. Like, there's some chance, maybe you could say that, yeah, sure. But then there's a process that goes on that we call natural selection. So to say it's just chance is extraordinarily ignorant. And then I'll have to go off on this whole, it takes less faith meme that props up every now and then. That, oh, it's less faith to believe in God than it is to believe in science. No. Well, wait a minute. Hold on. So is faith good or bad? Let me ask that question to you. And I really would love for you to give me an answer in text or video format. Is faith good or bad? Because here, you're suggesting that it's bad by saying that it takes less faith to believe in God. And if that's the case, then I would want to have as little faith as possible. And it takes me exactly 0 faith to accept evidence within biological evolution. So that's what I think is true. Whereas, if you think that it takes faith to believe in something, then, well, okay, fine. Then you want something that has actual evidence to it, which would be the scientific understanding of biological evolution and modification with, descent and natural selection and all the things that go with that. Well, your claim that it's all chance, since nobody that's an actual real scientist worth their salt would make that claim, only creationists seem to ever make it, because of that idea that it's all by chance, that might take some faith to believe. I don't believe that, because there's no evidence of it. So, I lack faith in that idea. What I agree with 0 faith, is the evidence, the overwhelming evidence, for natural selection and descent and evolution as a whole. But I have a very strong suspicion that whoever it is that is kind of giving you some apologetics to spout off has also poisoned your mind against the realities of science, perhaps in fear that in learning them you will move away from God. Well, you might, but you might not. But you certainly will have to move away from the idea of God that you hold today. This person that I interacted with some time on YouTube had the same sort of problem where he couldn't seem to understand that you can believe in God, but not believe in the things that you've been told that God is or does. To distance yourself from creationism and to let that go, because it's simply false and untrue. There are many people that understand science far better than I do on YouTube that explain these things, and they've explained, other people have explained them in books and lectures and etc. So the information is out there, and there's no excuse not to look at it unless you are deliberately trying to shield yourself from learning the truth about this. If you had evidence that it was just chance, then you could present that in a scientific way, and you would get some sort of award for doing so. But you won't, because there isn't. And if you're honest about it, you'll find that out. If you're dishonest, you'll continue doing these bad argumentations. Belief in God must be separate from the facts of the world. Or a different way to put it is, if your God requires you to think that 1 + 1 is 10, that God cannot be true. Your God right now is requiring you to reject evolution, Big Bang cosmology, and other facts of the way things really work, and so that God must be false. Maybe a different God exists, and maybe it is the God that you're thinking about. It's just you have to think about that God in a different way.
So the fourth and final argument that I'm going to be presenting today, it's my personal favorite. It is the moral argument. Now, this argument is based on something we can't avoid, and that is morality. So in our world, one common question that we Christians get a lot is, how does a good God allow evil to exist? Well, I'm not really going to answer that question right now, but I am going to take that question and talk about it a little bit, because if you're going to call something evil, then you have to know what good is. So when you ask, why does a good God allow evil, and you assume evil, so you might say Hitler's evil, or murder is evil, or torturing babies for fun is evil. Well, in order to get to that point, you have to know what good is. Otherwise, you say Hitler was evil, well, if you don't believe in God, then that's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. What Hitler did wasn't actually evil if he saw it as perfectly fine. So, without God, there's no objective moral standard.
Oh, that could be a whole video in and of itself. That's a horrible misunderstanding of the moral argument, but it doesn't matter. The moral argument doesn't work no matter how it's presented anyways. Morality is based on ethics, and ethics is rarely, if ever, talked about when apologists trot out this worn-out, broken argumentation. There are plenty of people that have zero concept of God, and their society seems to be doing just fine. They don't do things that are harmful, or they might, I don't know, but they don't do it in the numbers that the theists would expect to see. And there's those that have never had a God concept that do the things that are right and don't do the things that are wrong. There's societies and tribes that can't even have a God concept. It's not even that they don't have one. It's that the God concept is so foreign to their existence that they never even thought about it, and when they're introduced to it, they just don't comprehend it, and they do just fine. The idea that you can't know what's evil without knowing what's good is also very flawed and subtracts completely from what ethics is about. The ethical system that a believer might adhere to is DCT, the Divine Command Theory, which is the divine, God, orders you to do X, whatever X might be. Maybe God tells you, lick the wall. Okay, that's... why? You don't get to ask why. You go lick the wall, because God told you to do it. Abraham's a great example. Go kill your kid. Okay. And he goes to do it. Now, yes, he stopped, but that's not the important part. The important part is he obeys God. And this is repeated throughout the Old and New Testament, that obeying God is really good and something to do. And disobeying God is really bad. In fact, that's what led to all the problems in the first place, supposedly. So, Divine Command Theory wipes out the whole good and bad. It's good because God said it is. But God could then say the very thing that it just said was bad is now good. So there's no objective meaning there at all. There's only perhaps an illusion of it. Go kill your kid. Well, that's murder. That's murder. Go kill your kid. I'm God. I'm telling you to go murder your kid. Even though I told you earlier that it was bad to murder. Okay, so now it must be the most good thing I can do because God can't say it unless it's good to do. Well, but God didn't really mean for him to murder his kid. He didn't know that. And so he went to go do it. And if God hadn't substituted out, then he would have carried it on. And it would have been the best, most moral good thing he could have done, period. If somebody believes that God tells them to do something, and they do it, and that thing is something that repulses and is repugnant to the rest of us, we judge that person guilty. And we don't allow them to use, well, God told me to do it as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Nor do we allow the Satan told me to do it either. Because even if it's true, well, we can't know that it's true, and even if it's true, we can't act like it's true. What we do know is they did something that hurt other people. And we tend to consider that bad. The reason why we consider that bad depends on the ethics of the person and the group as a whole. There are many ethical systems out there. Here's a list of a few of them.
You can let me know which of these is your favorite, and if I missed any, make sure to let me know down in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you get notified every time I post a new video.
Alright, so that wraps up her video. I cut out some parts, but I left what was important for me to talk about intact. The original video is linked in the description. I urge her to check out these systems of ethics and explore them, because that last argument is, I wouldn't say the worst argument for God, but it's down near the bottom. Below it is precept somewhere. At any rate, we don't have empirical evidence, which is evidence that we could visualize in some shape or form. We don't have any repeatable tests that we can perform upon this God thing. And we do not have a valid or sound argumentation. Therefore, we must be skeptical of the conclusion.